Hi, how's everybody doing? Jeremy Langlois coming to you from Houmas House, Estate and Gardens. Absolutely beautiful summer day here in Louisiana. Might be a little hot, but that's just how it goes down here. You know, one thing I really enjoy as we do these videos and continue to cook together is we get so many comments of people. I want to say a week or two ago, I saw someone said, hi, here from Germany. Just people from literally all over the world watching this videos. That is just so incredible to me. It's sometimes I take for granted as I add some of these ingredients like crawfish to it, that some of you guys might not have access to some of these things. So we'll talk about some substitutions that we can have as we continue to cook. But with that said, I would love to know where you're watching from. So if you could drop in the comments section of this video on our Facebook page where you're tuning in from, we would just enjoy that so much. So what we're going to be cooking today is the classic Louisiana dish, crawfish etouffee. We're just coming at the end of crawfish season. It's summer, and this is just an absolutely mainstay classic, something. If you're a good Louisiana boy like me who grew up, we had this once or twice a week for dinner all the time. And we're cooking crawfish, but this recipe is so flexible. You can do shrimp etouffee, you can do crab etouffee, you can do chicken etouffee. You can easily swap out any protein as we start to cook it. Now, crawfish etouffee, the Louisiana classic, comes from our French roots and our French heritage here in Louisiana. And the word etouffee literally means to smother. And what we're going to do is we're going to be smothering this over some steamed rice. And one thing that, just a fun little aside story, whenever I was growing up in college, 20-year-old Jeremy, with one of his buddies who had all sorts of pets. He literally had, in Zachary, Louisiana, shout out, he had a goat, several dogs, several cats, birds, all kind of different animals in his house. He was that guy. But he also had a boa constrictor, and he named his boa constrictor Etouffee. I always thought that was, well, 20-year-old me thought that was kind of cool because it meant to smother. But anyway, with that said, shout out to my buddy Ben. We're going to go ahead and get cooking. We got our ingredients lined up. We got a good cast iron pot. Now, the thing about a crawfish etouffee is we're going to start off by making a good butter roux. And so we're going to start off. I got about half a pound of butter, and we're just going to start to melt this butter right into our black iron pot. If you've watched many of our videos before, you've heard me sing the praises of how much I love cooking in cast iron. I personally think that this is the greatest cooking vessel you could have for 90% of everything you would make, and all other cooking equipment, pots, pans, stainless steel pans with copper bottoms, all of those items are trying to replicate what a black iron pot does naturally, which is just holds hot heat and distributes it evenly throughout the entire vessel. I just love how cast iron does that. Okay, as our butter starts to cook, we have a fairly high heat, looking to get that good sizzle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start off like we do in Louisiana with our trinity: onion, celery, and bell pepper. So our onions are going to go in, our bell pepper in, and I got here, of course, all bell peppers taste similarly. The red bell peppers are a little sweeter, but all bell peppers taste the same. I always like, anytime I can, because we do eat with our eyes and presentation is important, I like to always include as many different colored bell peppers as I can. I just love the vibrancy that you get from those colors. But if you only have green or you only have red, that's fine too. But I have some green, red, and yellow bell peppers, which are going to go in to complete our trinity, our onion, celery, bell pepper. And what we're going to do here is it's cooking in. We have a good bit of that butter down here, and we're just starting to look to sweat these vegetables and just kind of saute them a little bit. And that just means we're looking to just have them kind of simmer and kind of cook and get a little translucent. Now, because we're starting off with butter, instead of, say, oftentimes we start off in a hot pan with oil, well, the advantages you get from oil is oil heats up and gets really hot before it smokes, whether it's olive oil or whether it's a salad oil, can get really hot. Butter, you have to be a little bit careful with. Whenever we place the butter into this hot black iron pan, butter can burn more easily and quickly than oil will whenever it gets hot. Oil will eventually burn at extremely high heats, but butter will burn at a much lower temperature. So that's just something you need to be careful about. A lot of the fundamentals of cooking is really just controlling your heat. So what I would suggest is whenever you say if you're cooking with a cast iron pan, you would put it on the fire, you'd start to warm it, and just put your butter in and let it start to melt. And as soon as it starts to bubble and crackle, you're hot, you're ready to go, you can get your vegetables in. But you do have to be a little bit careful, whereas if you were just, say, starting off with the same base with olive oil or oil, you can put it in and you don't have to worry about that. But one thing I do love about Louisiana cuisine is so often I'm adding this trinity into it. So I've probably, as we've done these cooking segments, done 10 different dishes where I've added onion, celery, and bell pepper. And one thing that's just so cool is you notice each one of those dishes are vastly different, but it always starts off with the same base of onion, celery, bell pepper, garlic. And that just shows the versatility of our cuisine. I'm going to add some garlic into the pot. Let that stir up a little bit. And now, if you were to look down into this pot right now, you'd see there's a lot of excess butter, just the liquid in the bottom of the pan. And that's what we're looking for, because what we're looking to do is make a roux. Now, a roux is always a thickener for soups and sauces. And classically, you would have oil or butter, and you would add equal parts butter and flour, and you would cook it. Everybody knows a good gumbo has a dark roux. So we add oil and flour, and then you really spend time, and we're going to make, when the weather cools, we will cook gumbo here, but you would make, you add your flour and you just kind of stir it around, and the darker it gets, because you're toasting that flour, it takes on its own flavor. Well, for etouffee, we're looking to make a butter roux. That's why we started off with so much butter in the beginning. And I'm just going to add enough flour. Now I'm kind of just, see how I'm drizzling it in there? That's to avoid any clumps. Just kind of sifting it down in there. But I'm adding just enough flour to pick up that butter that we have at the bottom of the pan. So that's going to go in, and I'm just going to keep adding butter until I see that I don't have, keep adding flour until I see I don't have any of that loose butter on the bottom of the pan. So that's going to go in. But this is going to act as our thickener, because the next thing that we're going to add is a couple more, we're going to start to add some liquid. Now, etouffee typically has tomatoes. You don't have to have tomatoes, but I like adding tomatoes. It gives, as the tomatoes cook down, they're going to have a little bit, it gives it a little kind of an orange hue and a little bit of flavor as well. So I'm going to add some diced tomatoes that have just been seeded and diced tomatoes, and a little bit of, you see how much I'm adding, not a whole lot, a little bit of tomato sauce. It's going to add a little bit of flavor and body to your etouffee. We're going to get that in here. And now everything has been picked up from that flour, and the whole thing is starting to thicken. Got a good sizzle. So now we're at the point where we're going to start to add some stock. This is crawfish stock. Now look, if you're cooking at home, I am a huge fan of, if you don't, we are lucky enough if you have access to the shells, and you can just add those to water and boil them with some onions and celery. Well, that's going to make a great stock. But I get the average person at home, they don't have time to make stocks, and that's totally understandable. In fact, whenever I cook at home, and I'm doing something similar to this, I am a huge fan of just going to the grocery store, walking down that soup section aisle of your grocery store, and you'll often see a lot of these canned or boxed broths. And they're really great, and they're really flexible too, because you're just looking to add some liquid with some flavor in it. So of course, since we're making crawfish etouffee, crawfish stock is the perfect marriage. However, if you're one of these people who doesn't want it to have such a strong seafood flavor, you can actually add, instead of adding water or crawfish stock, you can add chicken stock, vegetable stock, different things like that. You don't have to have that 100%. It's just going to give it a little bit of extra flavor, but it might mellow out some of that heavy seafood flavor if that's something that you're partial about. And as you see, what I'm doing is anytime I'm adding stock to a butter roux like we just made, I'll add a ladle or two, mix it in, and let it come up to a boil. Because how roux works is it won't thicken a soup or a sauce until it comes to a boil. That's when it reaches its maximum thickening potential. And what I do is I like to add some and then let it come up to a boil, and it's going to thicken. And the first ladle is going to look real thick and pasty. And then I just keep adding, I mix that in though, and then I add it step by step. Then I add another ladle, whisk it in. Other ladle, whisk it in till I eventually get this nice velvety, really smooth texture, this sauce consistency texture that coats the back of a spoon. That's exactly what we're looking for. So I have a really great etouffee base here. At this point, you could go in any direction that you would want it to. If you're making chicken etouffee, boom, chicken goes in. If you're making crab etouffee, you can add crab or shrimp, that can go in. But what I like to do is, I like to go ahead and I have some beautiful Louisiana crawfish tails. And just really great. Now, the thing about a lot of this delicate seafood is you don't want to overcook it. However, I want to get all this flavor. A couple things that we can do, that we can think about. Anytime you open a bag, this is typically how our crawfish comes. If it comes in a bag, just like this is a 1 pound bag. And oftentimes you have to ask yourself some questions. When you open this, I like to go ahead and just use this straight up. I don't rinse it or anything like that. Again, and the reason for that is there's so much fat and flavor in here, and I, as a chef, want to capture as much of these natural flavors as possible. However, as we were saying, if you're partial to not having that really strong seafood flavor, maybe you want to rinse off half of it or not rinse off some of it. I personally wouldn't suggest that because I like that flavor, but this does have those strong seafood flavors. So if that's something you're like, oh, it's a little too fishy or something like that, well, that's how you can kind of eliminate that. Now, one little tip that I like to do, I want this to now cook. It doesn't have to cook too long, but I want this to simmer because we're having all these already we have these great flavors of onion, celery, bell pepper, garlic. I want this, and the stock, I want this to simmer and let those flavors really develop. So I want it to simmer for about 20, 30 minutes, and then we'd be ready to serve. What I don't want to do if you're making, what I don't want to do is overcook my seafood, but still have that great flavor. So what I actually like to do, this is my pound of crawfish that I opened before. I'm going to take and I'm going to add a small handful of crawfish in here. And what that's going to do is we're making a sacrifice to the food gods. What's going to happen is those crawfish are going to just almost cook away. But we're going to be able to extract a lot of that flavor from the crawfish and allow it to develop in the sauce as it continues to cook. But we don't want to add all the crawfish right now because the crawfish itself would be undeniable, or you wouldn't be able to identify it whenever we go to serve it. So what we're going to do is add a little bit of crawfish now and just let that simmer. Let's pretend now that we've let that simmer for about 30 minutes or so. And now what we're ready to do is finish this dish. So what we're going to do, I have some chopped parsley. I like to add my parsley right at the end because it is this beautiful bright green, vibrant herb. And if I were to have added it earlier, it's going to turn from that beautiful bright green to kind of what I call that army dull green. And we don't want that. We want to keep that beautiful vibrancy in it. So we're going to add some parsley, and then we're just going to season up with some salt, some cracked black pepper, depending on how spicy you want it. Some people like a nice spicy etouffee. I'm a wimp. I don't like food too spicy, so I just add a couple dashes of hot sauce, but this would be the time now to crack out some cayenne pepper. A little sprinkle of cayenne pepper can really bring out some great heat, which that spice does go really nice with etouffee, but that's completely personal preference. And then now, at the very end, if you were doing this for, say, a dinner party or a group coming over, what I would do is I would get to this point right now and then stop. And then right before you're ready to serve, or whether you're at home, right before you're ready to serve, bring everything back up to a slow simmer. And now, at the very last second, we're going to add that crawfish in and just let it kind of warm up in this etouffee that we just made, and that way we're leaving that crawfish nice and plump and we're not overcooking it. And just get that right in there, and this is looking very good. Now all that's left to do is plate this up. We got, this is real simple. This is how I would plate it up at home. We have our plate here. We got just some steamed rice we're going to just put right on this plate. I've seen people serve crawfish etouffee over vol au vent shells. This is a great topping that you could do over a whole fillet of fried catfish or a piece of sauteed fish. It's not just over steamed rice. This is how we would do it at home. But crawfish etouffee itself is extremely versatile. It can be a main meal like we have here, or it could be something that you use as a topping or a sauce. Very versatile. But there you go, guys. I like to finish it off with a little bit of green onions and parsley on top. But the classic soul food that I grew up on, crawfish etouffee. We'll see y'all next week.